As now shown, I'm Helen Wilkinson. I'm a member of CECAN. I'm also a director of a consultancy called Risk Solutions who works in appraisal and evaluation where there's lots of complexity or risk or uncertainty. And I'm going to talk on choosing evaluation approaches. Now, the really good news is there's lots of methods that you can use to help evaluate in complex environments. All the standard ones will have some use, and the Magenta Book, new Magenta Book, has a really good supplementary guide setting out the details of a lot of methods that you can use. But unfortunately, there's no simple mechanistic way of saying, yes, that's the approach or approaches that I need for this particular problem. It's likely that hybrid designs using two or more different types of approach, looking at the problem from different perspectives, is going to be the most useful. And that mix of approaches you use might well change over the course of the evaluation. But we would suggest there are three key interrelated considerations that you should think about when selecting methods. And these are very much based on the design triangle that was developed by Elliot Stern, I believe. We've tweaked it a little bit for complex environments. The first thing to think about is the evaluation purpose. Why are you doing this why are you doing the evaluation in the first place? What you're going to use the results for. The second is the attributes of the system. Now, Elliot would say the attributes of the policy there, but we would say that you are putting the policy intervention into a system, and both the intervention itself and the system is likely to have attributes of complexity. Can you understand those? And the third thing would be, well, given that, what's the feasible designs? What is available and feasible that you can use? And you bring those considerations together to select your evaluation design. Okay, so just going into each of those three areas in a little bit more detail. Clarifying purpose. What do we mean about how the findings will be used? In the annex, we have identified three broad areas of question that you might want to answer. There's for listening and building. So this is to ensure that diverse voices are heard. We've talked about that. There's going to be many perspectives from many different people within the system that we want to bring in and understand in our evaluation. We will be wanting to build trust and legitimacy both in the evaluation itself and its findings, and also in the intervention that's being put in place, and also to generate champions for change. And this is very likely to be important at the beginning of the whole process of developing and implementing an intervention. As time goes by, we're going to want to build more learning and get more understanding both about our system and how the intervention is working within the system. This helps to manage risk and uncertainty and should provide information that will help us improve the policy and with the following wind and used appropriately to improve similar policies. And finally, the point at the right direction, accountability. So Stephen talked about looking at the value for money, value for effort. Was the policy implemented as it was supposed to be? Is it having the impacts anticipated? Critically, is it having impacts that we didn't anticipate that may not be desirable? And overall, is it delivering value for money? And looking at the sorts of approaches that we might use for that first part of listening and building, there's a whole class of approaches called participative or emancipatory approaches. Emancipatory approaches are all about empowering people. So as part of the evaluation, empowering them to take part in the evaluation and to contribute to it, but also to achieve change in their own environment. So if you've got interventions which are about people achieving change for their communities, emancipatory approach is going to be really useful. For learning, understanding why things are happening, to what extent, what contextual factors are affecting that. There's a whole class of theory-based approaches like realist evaluation, like contribution analysis, that can be very, very useful in that situation. And for accountability, where it's not possible to establish an experiment or some sort of experimental approach or statistical approach, then model-based approaches can be really useful. And they also have the advantage, as I think Ian suggested, that you can use them by creating a model of the theory of change, a model of the system, you can use them both to answer the question, what would have happened if the intervention wasn't in place? So set yourself up a virtual counterfactual where it's not possible to produce an experimental one. But you can also project into the future, use that to explore, not predict, that's very hard to do, but explore what might happen in the future, how sustainable any change you're observing might be, or whether it's likely to fall away. For systems attributes, Alex took us through all those attributes of complexity, so we want to understand which of those attributes are present, what effect they're having, and they only set out the two dimensions of complexity that we found particularly useful, so there's agreement and uncertainty. So where you have multiple perspectives, maybe even controversy and disagreement in the system, then participatory approaches that really bring stakeholders in to as part of the process, can be really useful. The other dimension was certainty. There's various sources of uncertainty. Some of this comes from the complex characteristics of the system. That means that it's very hard to understand what the outcomes of the system might be from looking at the individual elements of it. System mapping, as Nigel said, participatory system mapping, we have found really useful to understand not just the elements of the system, but how they might be interacting together. And you can use that as the basis for building a theory of change, which helps you understand what contextual factors might be important, whether there's actually going to be feedback loops and tipping points in your system that you can represent on your theory of change, which are typically not present in a lot of theory of changes that we're used to seeing in evaluations. The influence of context is really important, and methods like QCA and realist approaches really take that on board and treat context as another variable in the whole problem about whether your intervention is having an impact or not and what might be affecting that. And then there's the fact that everything can be still evolving, as we said. And there, if you can get and sit alongside the implementation of your policy or your intervention with approaches such as developmental evaluation, these are really powerful. They only promised I'd say a little bit more. I'm not going to go a great deal more except to point you to the book, which is really excellent, that talks about how you run this process, this iterative process of looking at your intervention, feeding back, making changes, looking again in a series of cycles. Moving on to feasible designs, there's a whole set around the resources you've got. What's not on that is the time you've got available. So what money have you got? What expertise can you get hold of? What data is available or obtainable within the timescales? And what are the risks of getting the answer wrong? So if you're in a really risk-critical situation, many health interventions might be along this line, then that has different implications for what sort of methodology you would choose than if you've got a chance to go in and, in a developmental sort of approach, tweak, adapt, and see what happens. And they have different implications for choice of approach. But this other thing, which I think they only really emphasised, was making sure that stakeholders are comfortable with the approach proposed. We all know that there are people who feel more comfortable with more quantitative, more experimental approaches, people who feel more comfortable with qualitative ones. And the truth of the matter is there is no gold standard methodology. There's just the right method given the challenge you've got and the challenges in the system. And you have to take time and effort to get people on board to the method that you think is going to be the right one for that particular situation, and then keep them on board. Plotting the various approaches that we have available to us on the Stacey matrix. As the Magenta Book says, we would always recommend working within a theory of change framework. And when we're at the simpler end of the spectrum, so we can isolate the effects of the intervention from the surrounding environment, then experimental and statistical approaches are often very powerful if you can get the data. And they can tell us a lot about how much of a difference the policy is making, if at all. They don't tend to tell us a great deal about the why question. Why is it making a difference? How is it making a difference? When we're in an environment where we're far from agreement, up here, There should be a... Never mind. No, I was trying to get a laser pointer, but I'm not sure if it's got a laser pointer on it, so I shan't press anything just in case. So in these far from agreement then, participatory methods, building consensus, building shared understanding. As we get into the more uncertain end of the spectrum, so when we're here, then participatory methods, adaptive developmental methods, participatory system mapping, really important to help build understanding of the system. When we're starting to want to understand what difference the policy is actually making and how, then we've got the theory-based generative causation, as they're often called, type methods such as realist evaluation and contribution analysis. Modelling and prediction helps us to answer the question, how well is policy doing when we can't set up an experiment, if at all? And configurational methods like QCA helps us determine what conditions are needed to make a difference. So what is sufficient to make a difference and what contributes to that. So how can the supplementary guide help? Well, Martha was very kind in saying that the tables that are presented about in the back of the guide should be very helpful to try and help navigate these three areas of three considerations for choosing methods. So she's talked us through that, so I don't need to talk you through anymore. We hope that you'll find them very helpful and useful. They're not going to be the complete answer, but used in conjunction with the links at the back of the guide and with the information that's available in the Magenta Book and its methods supplement, I hope they're going to help people think about what types of method and approach are going to be most useful in their particular situation. So, in summary, let's see if this will work. Yes, finally. Okay, so just to try and summarise then, what do we think are perhaps some of the key messages from the whole of the Magenta Book Supplementary Guide, and how we hope the guide will help. We think that it's really useful, really powerful to use a complexity lens to think about the situation your intervention is going to be working in and how to evaluate it. And we hope that the pictures and the definitions and the examples in the Magenta Book Guide will help provide a language for having conversations around complexity. A really important issue is the unpredictability and uncertainty associated with complex systems. Nothing you can do is going to remove that. That's just how they are. They will continue to change and evolve over time. So you have to work hard to keep your stakeholders, the people you're doing the evaluation for, on board to the fact that they're unlikely to get definitive answers to their evaluation questions, but they will get information that should be useful. So you perhaps heard the saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. All evaluations are going to be imprecise, but we hope that they're going to be useful. Systems mapping, really, really powerful. Participatory systems mapping, most powerful of all. And you can use that to develop your theory of change to really capture some of those systems aspects so you can take them into account in your evaluation. There's a load of evaluation approaches out there. Some of them are new, some of them will be new to particular departments or fields or disciplines. They're borrowed from other fields. Use them. Think about how you can use them and how you can use them in combination. You will need to work hard to keep some stakeholders on board to those methods, those approaches. And you need to be willing to change the approach in response to a changing situation or understanding. And that usually means if you're a commissioner, building the ability to flex a design into the procurement process. Because it's not helpful to get halfway through an evaluation and be told you can't change the approach when everybody knows it needs changing. So, thank you very much. I shall leave you with the picture we would have liked to have gone on the front of the annex, but we suspect that the Treasury won't allow us.
Hello, thank you. I'm Zoe from DEFRA. People are mostly inherently uncomfortable with uncertainty. How can you help them to be more comfortable with uncertainty?
Ooh, that's the holy grail, isn't it? I've worked in risk and uncertainty all my professional life, so to me, and I still struggle to cope with uncertainty. We are hardwired to make decisions based on certainty of what the outcome might be, not the likelihood that it might be that outcome. I think you can only do it by keeping talking, by keeping explaining. Don't let it be a surprise. Keep your client on board, keep your stakeholders on board. Let them be part of every process throughout the process. Somebody asked about how you help people interpret findings when there's no hard and fast answers. Well, we try, when we're doing evaluations, to make sure that the client steering group, the key stakeholders, are informed about every stage of the process and are informing every stage of the process. So that when it comes to the end and the answer isn't yes, no, 42, they understand that, they know that, but they understand what they can take from the evaluation, from the analysis, from the modelling, because they've been intimately involved in the process. And working with DEFRA, we've worked with DEFRA on foot-and-mouth disease control and water abstraction reform, and that's how we've done it. We've kept the client, the key stakeholders, involved in every stage of the process so that what the uncertainty means becomes embedded in their understanding. It's not something they've got to take on board at the last minute.
So I think it only remains for me to say thank you very much, first of all, to our speakers, all of them, and secondly to you for coming along and hearing all about this. If there are others, your colleagues who you feel ought to hear all of this, we are running the same event again in Birmingham on March the 16th. And at the beginning of April, there will be a video available from our website summarising what has been said today with the presentations. So, thank you very much indeed. Keep in touch with us. There is a CECAN mailing list, which I hope, if you're not already a member of, do subscribe again on our website. To assist with climate change, could you please recycle your badges as you leave, reduce plastic waste, and a safe trip home. Thank you very much indeed, everyone.